One of the other important things that's developing during the first 12 weeks of pregnancy is the placenta. The placenta has two parts. Remember we talked about the trophoblast. From the blastocyst, those outer cells, the trophoblast forms the fetal part of the placenta, which is called the chorionic villus. So I'm going to outline it here in purple. It's this thing that kind of looks like a tree. So everything here in purple is the fetal part of the placenta. And remember, those are made from those trophoblast cells that we saw in the blastocyst. And these structures, and there's several of these, this is just a picture of one, but it forms all these tree-like structures, these projections called chorionic villi. Then you have the maternal part. So the mom also makes a part of the placenta. So all of this out here that's surrounding the chorionic villus is the maternal part. So the point of the placenta is it brings the mom's blood and the fetal blood very close. So the blood vessels that you see here inside the chorionic villus are fetal blood. And the blood vessels that you see up here are maternal blood. So the placenta brings mother and fetal blood very close to each other. Now, under normal conditions, they don't mix. They just get close enough to do diffusion. So they exchange substances with each other. So now think back to chapter 4 when you learned about diffusion. Diffusion is the movement of a substance from high to low concentration. And we're moving stuff back and forth between the mother and the fetus based on diffusion. So a couple of examples. We want carbon dioxide. The fetus is making carbon dioxide, but it's not breathing. There's no air in the womb. So we need to move carbon dioxide from fetal blood into maternal blood. So that means we need the fetal blood to be the high concentration, and we need the maternal blood to be the low concentration, so that diffusion will move from high to low. So we have to make the maternal blood low in carbon dioxide. This way it will draw the carbon dioxide from the fetal blood. So the way you do that is to breathe more. Every time you breathe, remember we've talked about this before, every time you breathe, you lose carbon dioxide. So pregnancy hormones will stimulate the mother to take more breaths. She's going to have a faster breathing rate. And if you increase your breathing rate, you lose more carbon dioxide. So one of the effects of pregnancy hormones is to stimulate the mother to have a faster breathing rate. That way she loses more carbon dioxide, and then that will cause her blood to be low in carbon dioxide, which will set up the gradient for diffusion to draw carbon dioxide out of the fetal blood. Another example is nutrients, and especially glucose. The fetus needs glucose, so we want it to move from the mother to the fetus. So remember, we move high to low. So this means we want the mother to have high glucose so that it will move into the fetus where it's lower. So we're going to alter the mother so that she maintains a higher blood glucose. So the pregnancy hormones, you may have heard of insulin. Insulin is the hormone that regulates your blood glucose. Pregnancy hormones suppress insulin. So a pregnant woman will have less insulin. And insulin is the hormone that regulates your blood glucose. So if you have less insulin, your blood glucose is higher. And then this again sets up that gradient for diffusion. Because the mother's blood glucose is high, more will move to the fetus. In fact, a side effect that you see of this is diabetic women tend to have very large babies. The reason diabetics have such large babies is because if you're diabetic, you have that high glucose, and so much glucose goes into the fetus. So they actually have too much glucose goes into the fetus. And it will stimulate that fetus to kind of overgrow. So it's typical for a diabetic woman to have a 10 or 12 pound baby. Another important function of the placenta is making hormones. So the placenta does this diffusion with mother's blood. It also makes hormones. So let's tie into some things you've already learned before. Remember that the corpus luteum, that's the remains of the follicle after ovulation. Remember that this secretes estrogen and progesterone. And that estrogen and progesterone stimulate the uterus to maintain the endometrium. Then remember when you have implantation, so see right here, implantation, the embryo secretes HCG. So this orange line is HCG. HCG maintains the corpus luteum. So without HCG, the corpus luteum would die. It would turn into a corpus albicans. Estrogen and progesterone drop, and the uterus sheds its lining. But during pregnancy, you don't want that to happen. So the implanted embryo secretes HCG. It maintains the corpus luteum. So then it continues to secrete estrogen and progesterone. And the uterus keeps the endometrium. So in order to maintain a pregnancy, you have to maintain high levels of estrogen and progesterone. If at any time the estrogen and progesterone drop, the uterus will shed and you would have a miscarriage. So in order to maintain the pregnancy, it's very important to keep estrogen and progesterone high. So far we've been relying on HCG from the embryo. That happens for the first 12 weeks. So for 12 weeks, the embryo is responsible because it secretes HCG, which then maintains the corpus luteum, which secretes the estrogen and progesterone. So the embryo is keeping itself there by secreting the HCG to keep the corpus luteum, to keep the estrogen and progesterone. But then at 12 weeks, the placenta takes over. And it relieves the embryo of that responsibility. So you can see right here, placenta is now the main producer of estrogen and progesterone. So now you can let the corpus albicans or the corpus luteum turn into a corpus albicans. So you can see right here at that 12-week mark is when the HCG drops. So now the embryo no longer has to maintain that high level of HCG, and you go ahead and let the corpus luteum turn into a corpus albicans. And so it no longer secretes estrogen and progesterone. But that's okay because now the placenta makes all the estrogen and progesterone. And then the uterus still maintains the endometrium and maintains the pregnancy. So there are some of the basic functions of the placenta. It's doing diffusion between mother and fetal blood, and starting at 12 weeks, it takes over the job of making estrogen and progesterone in order to maintain the pregnancy. Now we're ready to look at fetal development. So we know that the embryo takes 8 weeks to form. And we know that the placenta takes 12 weeks to form. Now from weeks 9 to 38 is fetal development. And remember the different ways to count weeks. This is counting weeks fertilization to birth. A doctor would call this time period weeks 11 to 40 because they add on the extra 2 weeks because they count from the first day of the last period. Remember, we talked about that in the first video. But we're going to go with the biological definition, weeks 9 to 38. So at week 9, you have the organ systems are there. They have formed. So they're present, but they're not functioning. And the fetus is very small. At 9 weeks, the fetus is typically 9 centimeters long and about 28 grams. So 9 centimeters is going to be roughly 3 inches. 28 grams is about what an egg weighs. So that's what you have at 9 weeks. Then you spend fetal development, growing and gaining function of the organ systems. So that then by week 38, you have a full-size fetus ready to be born. So it's full size and functioning and ready for birth. So a full-term fetus at 38 weeks is going to be about 36 centimeters long. And that's crown to rump. So they don't count the legs. They measure head to butt, crown to rump. And the weight is going to be, and it varies a lot, but about 2.5 to 4.5 kilograms. So there's the remainder of development. Then next we'll look at birth.